Welcome to Storms and Floods, talking to conservatives about water and climate. Hello, my name is Jim Waltman. I'm the Executive Director of the Watershed Institute, a nonprofit organization in central New Jersey committed to keeping water clean, safe, and healthy. Our scientists, educators, and advocates work to advance this essential mission in the country's most densely populated state, and one that's been hit hard by climate change. Climate change is a major threat to the environment and people of New Jersey, and we're already experiencing significant impacts, from sea level rise to heightened precipitation and the flooding and polluted runoff that result. The Watershed Institute is extremely grateful for the work of Sea Change Conversations, a nonpartisan education resource on climate change, and we're proud to call them a partner. Sea Change Conversations helps people across the political spectrum understand why they should care about climate change. They educate audiences throughout the country on how climate change will impact them personally, why there is urgency to address it, and how to forge consensus for action. You'll soon hear from two exceptional communicators about how they've been successful talking about climate change to conservatives in conversations that they've had in diverse communities across the country. Kathleen Biggins founded Sea Change Conversations in 2014. Her previous experience includes working with Glovier and Mather advertising agency in New York City and QLM Marketing in Princeton, New Jersey, where she lives. The New Orleans native was a reporter for the Times-Picayune after graduating from the University of Virginia and studying international relations at the Albert Ludwig University in Freiburg, Germany. Sophie Glovier is the Assistant Director of Policy at the Watershed Institute and a member of Sea Change Conversations. In her work at the Watershed Institute, she works with citizens and local governments to develop and implement strong environmental ordinances, particularly ones to address polluted stormwater runoff. She has served as chair of the Town of Princeton's Environmental Commission and on the boards of 4 different nonprofit conservation organizations in the Princeton area, including the Watershed Institute. Sophie has also been a presenter for Sea Change Conversations in numerous states. She is a graduate of Princeton University and Columbia Business School and received a postmaster's certificate in sustainability strategy from the New School. Now, I hope you enjoy the presentation and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Jim, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Kathleen Biggins, and I am the founder and president of Sea Change Conversation. We are so honored to be back at the Land Trust Alliance rally for the 2nd year in a row. Last year, we discussed our outreach to moderates conservatives around the issue of climate change and how we have set up a system where we can become a trusted messenger using trusted sources and help them analyze the risk of climate change and understand why they should care. We are so thankful to the Land Trust who have invited us into their communities to share our message. And we are excited to report that we are back on the road presenting around the country. Now, of course, today we are going to be speaking about water. But as a climate change education organization, we will begin by looking at the issue of water through the lens of climate change. Then my colleague, Sophie Glovier, will drill down on how land use can both ameliorate and exacerbate some of these pressures created by climate change and our water usage. Now, in our Climate Change Primer 101 that we spoke about last year, we look at the topic from a 360-degree view, looking at how it will impact our geopolitical stability, how it will impact our jobs and economy, and how it will impact our personal health and safety. We have a second new primer that we are launching that really focuses on that last aspect of climate change, and that is how it impacts our health and safety. And within that primer, we really drill down on how climate change will impact our water systems. And I thought I'd take a minute to share with you how we approach this presentation. When we start off our presentation, we try to ground people in an understanding of how climate change works, the basic science. and also give them an idea of just what could be coming, what the potential consequences are in the fairly near future. So let's go back to science class together and think about what is causing climate change. We are changing the composition of our atmosphere by changing the ratio of greenhouse gases in it. And that has a major role in how our climate and weather patterns react. So when the solar radiance comes in, it passes through the atmosphere and strikes the Earth. Much of that energy is absorbed, but quite a lot of it ricochets back out into space. And when it does so, it is at a different wavelength. And that tiny, tiny, tiny portion of our atmosphere that is made up of greenhouse gases, primarily nitrous oxide, methane, carbon dioxide, and water vapor, capture some of that ricocheting energy and re-radiate it back down to the planet. Without that tiny portion of our atmosphere being compromised by greenhouse gases, we would have a frozen planet, so they play an outsized role. But when we add to them, it simply means that they capture more of that ricocheting energy, re-radiating it back down to the surface, warming up our temperatures and adding energy into our climate systems. And we are adding up quite a lot of carbon. This slide indicates the natural fluctuations in carbon dioxide when nature is left to her own purpose. You can see for the last 800,000 years, the fluctuations have been quite small. But when we hit the Industrial Revolution, the last 100 years, we can see that the change has been dramatic. We have increased our carbon dioxide by about 43% since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, our methane by 2.5 times what existed at that point. And we are doing it at an astounding rate, at a rate that's almost 100 times than it normally happens in nature. And since we know that adding carbon dioxide up into the air means that temperature will increase, it's no surprise that we have raised our temperature by about 1.1 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And of course that means that we are getting warmer across all of our seasons. But the one that causes the most concern, of course, are our summers. And I think this slide is very helpful because it indicates how just a small change in our average global temperature has really shunted us into extreme ranges on how we experience life on the surface. Look at the amount of extreme heat we are experiencing today versus back around 1950. And that means that we are being pushed into some pretty concerning temperatures. This graphic talks to the issue of heat and humidity. We all know that heat is only part of the equation. An 86-degree Fahrenheit day can be deadly if the humidity is too high, simply because then our bodies can't sweat to cool ourselves down and keep us safe. This graphic takes a look at where our cities will be towards the middle of the century and how many of the danger days, days where the heat and humidity together is above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And we can see that more or less the entire country will experience more of these danger days. For New York, 71 days, and Washington, D.C., 79. But perhaps most intriguing is that the study also showed that our cities are figuratively moving south, or else our climate is moving north. It's projected by 2050 that the cities in the northern hemisphere will experience climate similar to cities 600 miles to the south of them today. So for New York, that would mean a climate more like Virginia Beach, Minneapolis more like Kansas City, Charlotte like Memphis, Phoenix like Baghdad, and London like Barcelona. So if we continue on our current emissions path, we could see dramatic changes over the next 3 decades. And for some of our cities in the South, Southwest, and Midwest, it is especially concerning. This is a chart created by the National Weather Service, showing in red the areas where heat and humidity are dangerous. It goes up to 136 degrees. Scientists say that some of our cities, as I said, in the South and Midwest, could be off the charts during the heat of the summer in the next 2 to 3 decades, literally achieving temperatures that have never been experienced by humans on the planet so far. And of course, heat is all around the world, not just in our country. This graphic is a very interesting depiction of how extreme heat will spread to many more geographical areas. In fact, this study, again, if we continue on our current emissions path, predicts that almost a third of the world's population will be in areas that could experience temperatures that are currently only found in the hottest areas of the Sahara, which are depicted in these black dots. And that represents about 0.8% of the world's surface. But we can see the dark brown shaded areas include areas in South America, North Africa, the Middle East, India, and Australia. So we can imagine as these temperatures rise that the pressures on the people living in these areas will be great. And we will have all sorts of migratory and refugee pressures simply from the excessive heat. Now, we share that heat with you because that is a wonderful way of envisioning what the future holds. But climate change isn't just about heat. The increases in this area actually create a domino effect across many of the natural systems that we look to keep us safe and to keep us healthy. So in our health and safety primer, we really drill down on kind of the 5 pillars that underscore and support our ability to stay healthy. And these include things like being able to be safe outside and build adequate shelter, things like having clean water, food security, clean air, and the ability to manage the diseases that nature is throwing at us. So normally we would go through all 5 pillars, but today obviously we're going to focus on the second one, which is clean water. Our bodies are primarily made up of water, and we use it for so many things. We need it for our digestion, for our circulation, even to cushion our joints. And we use it to clean our environment, to get rid of pathogens and contaminants that can make us sick. About 1/3 of the world's population today does not have adequate resources of clean water, and climate change is going to make that worse. How? Well, the first way we'd like to talk about is the fact that climate change exacerbates extreme drought. Why? Because the hotter temperatures means that when the rain does fall, more of it evaporates and less of it gets absorbed by our plants and our soils. And that means that our aquifers are not replenished at the same rate, and the water that is down there often is more concentrated and contaminated. Another way that climate change is impacting our water systems is through harming our snowpacks. As the precipitation falls through the year, it's falling later as rain instead of snow. And our snowpacks are melting earlier in the warm temperature of the spring. And that means there's less surface water in our rivers, our dams, and our reservoirs downstream during the heat of the summer, when we need them for our crops, for our cities, and for wildlife. In addition, climate change is also working to make our rainstorms more dangerous. And it's just physics. Because the oceans are warmer, it means that more ocean water is evaporating. And because the atmosphere is warmer, it means that it can hold more of that water vapor. For every degree Celsius hotter it is, the air can hold about 7% more water vapor. So it simply means that when we have these rainstorms, it's more likely to be in a deadly torrent instead of a restorative shower. And we can see from this graphic that it's really happening more all across the country, even in areas that are experiencing much less rain. And it means that these cataclysmic floods can happen anywhere, whether it's our nation's capital or in Nashville, in Germany, or in China, as we experience just this summer. And remember, we are projected to get much warmer, so this problem will only get more dramatic and dangerous as we move further into the century. And while we may have too little water sometimes and too much water at other times, it means that the water we are getting is often also too dirty. Why? Well, this flooding can be very disruptive to our water treatment systems for our towns and our cities, but also for areas that have heavy industry, because when these areas get flooded out, very large loads of toxic chemicals can spread into surrounding areas and into our waterways, including after Hurricane Harvey, where over 365 tons of hazardous chemicals got swept into nearby areas. And this flooding has a secondary impact because it can lead to the spread of waterborne diseases like dysentery or cholera. And it also can lead to mold infestations, which has its own health hazards. Let's move quickly to sea level rise. I think we often think of the fact that storm surges can impact structures and land, but we may not think about how sea level rise impacts our water as much. And in fact, that storm surge can indeed impact our water supplies, but even without a storm, sea level rise can play havoc with our water resources. Why? Because seawater and freshwater have different densities, and when we pump out our fresh water, can be replaced by the seawater and literally poison our wells. And this is happening up and down our coastline. And down in Florida, the aquifer that is responsible for about 7 million people's drinking water, the Biscayne aquifer, is currently under threat by sea level rise. And it's important to note that there are many countries of the world, like Vietnam and Bangladesh, where their population centers are on river deltas and that recognize that they will have increased pressures as well. But it's not just our wells we have to be concerned about. We also have to be concerned about our river water, because as the sea is rising, it's pushing that salty water upstream, so that those salt fronts are coming up close to where many major cities take their drinking water. So a double whammy of pressure on drinking water supplies. And of course, we need to mention that the hotter temperatures of climate change, mixed with the excessive runoff from fertilization and septic tanks, can cause havoc in our lakes and on our coastline. These are pictures of algal blooms. The green, of course, is a bacteria that is exacerbated by climate change in the warmer waters. And this can be deadly to sea life and also even to our pets if they swim in it. The red tide down off our coastline is very similar. And people can get ill simply from the air blowing over the red tide and irritating their lungs and breathing passages. And one last slide I have to share. It is indeed a bit shocking. This is white sea snot that is created in Turkey by the warmer temperatures mixing with phytoplankton that are putting out too much mucus. And this mucus is suffocating sea life and obviously degrading the whole entire ecosystem. And I put it in a bit for shock effect because I think that the impacts that climate change is having on our water systems is indeed shocking. Normally from this area, we would go through the other 5 pillars, explaining quickly how climate change is harming each of them and harming our ability to stay safe and healthy. And then we end with a section that really analyzes what we can do. We recognize that we have the tools in hand with renewables and battery storage and other breakthroughs to handle a lot of the threat, but that we need to continue to innovate to make sure that we develop new technologies that can get us further along in meeting this risk. We also recognize that since nature is no longer playing by the same rules, we need to break some of our paradigms as well and start playing by new rules as we move to restructure and prepare for what is coming. And we recognize that there are some things that will be unmanageable and that we need to create the tools to mitigate them. And lastly, that we need to adapt what is unavoidable. Again, we end on a positive note because we at Sea Change do believe that if we pivot together, we can move to reduce this risk. So I've given you kind of a big picture view of how we view water within the climate lens. I'd like to hand it off now to my colleague and friend, Sophie Glovier. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen, for that excellent introduction to water-related climate issues. That really took a very global view, and what I'm excited to do with you today is to take a look at this issue from the ground level up. My name, again, is Sophie Glovier. I'm the Assistant Policy Director at the Watershed Institute, and I'm proud to be a Sea Change Conversations team member. I'll start by giving you a brief overview of the Watershed Institute's work. Since 1949, keeping water clean, safe, and healthy has been at the heart of our mission. We work to protect and restore the water and natural environment in central New Jersey using a variety of strategies. Housed on a 950-acre preserve in Pennington, New Jersey, we have scientists, educators, and advocates on our staff. In my role as the Assistant Policy Director, I work with 25 municipalities in the Stony Brook Millstone and Delaware River watersheds to help them develop policies that will protect and enhance their waterways and natural environment. Helping cities and towns plan to mitigate and adapt to climate change so that they can protect the health and well-being of their community members is an important part of our work. Our goal in communicating about climate change is to illustrate how climate change is already negatively affecting communities' water and local environment, and what steps towns can take to mitigate and adapt to that risk. This is critical because without this understanding, municipal leaders won't be able to make the best plans for their communities. The towns that we work with have a variety of political perspectives, and our communications are developed with that in mind. We also look for effective ways to communicate the importance of natural solutions to climate-related issues, something that we in the land trust community are very aware of. But when most people think about solutions to climate change-related problems, buying an electric vehicle or adding solar panels is what comes to mind, rather than the importance of preserving land, tree canopies, and stream buffers. So we've been experimenting with some different ways to communicate that protecting trees, streams, and open space is essential in our efforts to protect cities and towns from the negative effects of climate change. In this presentation, I'm going to share with you some specific strategies that we use in central New Jersey, and I hope that this approach can be customized to the places where you live and work. Whenever possible, we start our presentations with very local visuals and data that clearly demonstrate the climate-related problems that that individual community is experiencing. Where I work in central New Jersey, that usually means showing photographs and videos of flooding like this one. When possible, it's also impactful to use data from stream gauges to show that we are experiencing new peaks in water levels over time, and to connect that to the economic costs that our communities are facing as a result of changes in local flooding and costs of flood-related damage to our infrastructure. You should be able to find data on the streams near you by searching for the U.S. Geological Service's Water Data for the Nation. This is a project of the Department of the Interior. The goal of showing local visuals and stream gauge data is to establish that shared agreement that there are water-related problems in the community. And often we find that these visuals will produce nods of recognition and a conversation about other problem spots around town. After we've established the shared agreement that there are local water-related problems, in this case flooding, our goal is to explain why that flooding is happening and how it is connected to climate change. Just like sea change conversations, we use data from trusted sources. In this slide, we show data from New Jersey's state climatologist to demonstrate the fact that precipitation is increasing. And then based on research into effective communication strategies around water and green infrastructure that we conducted with Katja Luxem, a Princeton University graduate student, we convert that inches metric into a measurement unit that people can relate to, a gallon. While community members and elected officials may be generally aware that precipitation is changing, it's important to provide them with a specific number in a unit of measurement that is familiar to them. When possible, we always include local data. This slide is from a municipal climate action plan and shows data at the county level using over a century's worth of measurement. The trend showing increasing temperatures and average annual precipitation is clear. Here's a website where you can find localized precipitation data from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, for the place where you live. Once we've shown the increase in precipitation, we move on to the fact that the precipitation that we are experiencing is coming in more intense storms. To do this, we use a slide from Climate Central that is also used in the Sea Change Conversations primer. It shows the increase over time in extreme precipitation events. We explain why an increase in temperature results in more precipitation. For every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature, the atmosphere can hold approximately 7% more water. This supercharging of the water cycle is making for an increase in rainfall events that are more likely to create disruptive and even dangerous conditions in our daily lives. We focus on the fact that the projections are that we will be experiencing a continued increase in these more intense storms. The next thing we talk about is the importance of understanding how changes in land use are exacerbating climate-related issues. Again, we use the most local data that we can find. Here we show a slide that provides an overview of the land use changes in our region. The graphic is from our state university records. Now here is a video that shows the change in impervious cover in one of the towns where we work from 1990 to 2012. You can watch the increase in the light lavender color, which shows the addition of impervious surface. We sourced this data from a map created by Rowan University. Your state or local university may have a similar resource to help you track changes in impervious cover. This is another instance where community members and elected officials are generally aware that development is continuing and impervious cover is increasing, but this graphic is an easy visual way to see the magnitude of change over time and to get a sense of the cumulative impact. We also have been doing grant-funded work to perform detailed impervious cover assessments in the communities where we work and to recommend specific sites and strategies where these surfaces can be disconnected, eliminated, or mitigated with green infrastructure. We use this graphic to explain how that increase in impervious surface is affecting the natural hydrology of our communities. It helps people to understand why the flooding is increasing. Not only do we have more water falling in more intense events, but much less of it is able to infiltrate into the ground. In this visual of an undeveloped watershed, you can see that only 10% of the water runs off. However, in a fully developed watershed, fully 55% of water is running directly into local waterways. This helps people understand why climate-related changes combined with land use decisions are leading to flooding problems in many communities, and that provides a platform for understanding the importance of natural solutions. It's also important to educate municipal leaders and community members about the impact that climate-related trends combined with these land use choices are having on water quality as well as quantity, and the important role of natural solutions in addressing the problem. We show data on water quality, in this case collected by our community science program StreamWatch, which often surprises people, and explain the unintended consequences of traditional stormwater management, which sends a large volume of untreated water quickly and directly into our streams and rivers, and the power of green infrastructure solutions to slow and clean the stormwater runoff. The waterways of this municipality have elevated levels of E. coli and phosphorus, and the biological health of their streams is impaired. In New Jersey, the majority of our waterways do not yet meet the standards of the Clean Water Act. Like many places across the country, we are also experiencing an increase in harmful algal blooms, another climate-related water quality issue that Kathleen referred to. So to summarize, we put these three factors together: more water plus more impervious cover plus more pollution results in a serious climate change-related problem for communities which demands action. Once we've provided an overview of the climate-related water issues addressing a community, we can start to talk about the power of natural solutions. So to summarize our approach, we use very local images and data to build that shared understanding which is so important of water-related problems. And then we use as local and relevant data as possible from trusted sources to connect the problems to the issue of climate change. We also highlight the importance of changes in land use and show how without action, flooding will continue to increase and water quality will continue to suffer. Now let's talk about how we build the case for natural solutions as strategies to mitigate and adapt to climate change, particularly to address water-related issues. The first example of this work relates to land preservation and understanding how the decisions on whether to develop or preserve properties will affect stormwater runoff and potentially flooding. Princeton, New Jersey, one of the towns where we work, is experiencing significant flooding issues. Working with scientists at Princeton University and the New Jersey Institute of Technology, the Princeton Environmental Commission has done an analysis of the municipality's remaining pieces of open space, rating their value on a variety of metrics, including stormwater management. The value of one of the largest remaining parcels of open space in town, 153 acres, is shown here. This data about the physical and economic benefits of preserving the property adds to the strength of the case for preservation. The tools to do this type of analysis are evolving and becoming more accessible to the layman. I recently watched an excellent webinar about iTree Hydro. iTree is a software suite from the USDA Forest Service that provides urban and rural forestry analysis and benefits assessment tool. They are currently developing iTree Hydro to make it easier to understand where to install trees and other green infrastructure to achieve the most benefits to reduce flooding and improve water quality. Trees play an important role as green infrastructure to absorb stormwater and are important to communities for their role in sequestering CO2, the habitat they provide, and the shade which decreases on-the-ground temperatures. We all know that trees are facing unprecedented challenges, not only due to climate change and development, but also because of invasive species. But many municipalities are not aware of how drastically their tree canopy is declining and the implications that may have for their residents in the era of climate change. This slide is part of an analysis that we did for a neighborhood that was experiencing increasing flooding issues. We were able to show them clearly how they were losing trees over time and to give them information about how much water large native trees can take up. The Tree Benefit Calculator is an excellent resource to use. Once residents understood how climate change and land use decisions are exacerbating their flooding issues, they are more motivated to plant trees to replace those that they have lost. Lastly, it's important to educate community members and elected officials about how the water-related issues stemming from climate change disproportionately affect their low-income and minority community members. The reasons for that relate back to something that we started with, communities' choices about land use. These neighborhoods do not look the way they do by accident, and the mitigation measures needed to reduce risk will not appear by accident. The Watershed Institute holds an annual conference, and last year we had the opportunity to learn more about this topic when Groundworks USA presented a session on their Climate Safe Neighborhoods Partnership, which brings together 9 groundwork trusts, including one in Elizabeth, New Jersey, to explore the relationship between historical race-based housing segregation and the current and predicted impacts of climate change. These 9 trusts are working closely with residents and stakeholders to organize, mobilize, and effect systems change to make communities more resilient to extreme heat and flooding, and we are working with community group partners in Trenton, New Jersey to do the same. A recently launched tool that is available to us in New Jersey is this Water Risk and Equity Map, which has been developed through the efforts of Jersey Water Works and Rutgers. It offers an easy way for community members and elected officials to access water risk data, including flooding risk, impervious cover, tree canopy cover, water quality, and more. So to summarize, our approach to talking about climate change to audiences of a variety of political views is to start with a common acknowledgement of climate-related water issues by using local visuals and precipitation and flooding data. Then we work, very much like Sea Change Conversations, to use data from trusted sources to explain the reasons for climate-related water issues. By providing data on land use changes over time and the power of natural solutions, we work to build a base of awareness and understanding to position municipalities to make informed decisions to protect the health and well-being of their citizens by protecting and enhancing their natural resources to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Municipalities need to recognize the importance of natural solutions like land preservation, that these are part of their toolkit for addressing climate change-related water problems. Having a good understanding of the reality and threats of climate change is a critical platform for informed planning. We hope that this has been helpful to you, and we're eager to hear your thoughts. Also, if you'd like to learn more about water-related topics in our work, please join us at our Watershed Institute Conference, November 3rd through 5th, available virtually. You can find more information about that at www.thewatershed.org.
Sophie, that was so informative, and it was so hopeful to me to hear about all of these interesting tools that are now becoming available that allows us to really analyze and measure progress. And that enables us to be more confident in taking action. So thank you for sharing all of that.
My pleasure.
Now, one of the things that Jim mentioned in the introduction was that our state, New Jersey, is one of the most built-out states there is. We have a very dense population here. Are you finding that as you approach municipalities to save land and to move to mitigate on these water issues, they're moving ahead in rapid development? Is there kind of a yin and yang pressure there?
You know, what we really see, especially in a state that is so close to build out, is the importance of smart planning. And we are really encouraging both land trusts and community members to get involved as part of that process, because the groups that tend to be involved in that process are people who want to develop land. And so we really need to build an understanding among elected officials and community members that building in these areas of open space, beyond being important for all the wonderful reasons that we appreciate open space, are really a climate change mitigation and adaptation strategy. And we certainly don't want to be creating a lot of development that is going to create a lot of additional flooding and then trying to turn around and spend a lot of money to address that flooding in our communities.
Like kind of cutting off one hand to help the other.
Exactly, and I think those two issues don't get connected enough, and I hope that with some of these tools that really can demonstrate in a very quantitative fashion the amount of stormwater that can be unleashed through a development, for example, that we can really use those tools to encourage smarter planning.
That's really interesting, because I know from my own impression of open space, it's been so much about not messing with my view, not messing with my neighborhood, and kind of the feeling that we all collectively own that view. But the actual amelioration of all of these other pressures hasn't been communicated as well. Are you finding that municipalities are helping you get that word out? Are they understanding it and using their pulpit to help their communities understand, their people, their residents?
I think that they are, and something else that I am really seeing the power of is to work with lots of different constituencies within the town and even specifically within the municipal government. So the engineers, for example, who are responsible for dealing with the flooding and all of the water-related issues, who are responsible for the budget of repairing the roads and the bridges, they can be real allies. The emergency management personnel, who have to go out and mark the roads when they close, who have to go out and rescue people who are in trouble. So all of these kind of non-traditional partnerships who can come together with the open space community, again, to support this smart, informed planning approach, I think can really help to elevate the use and effectiveness of natural solutions in combating these water-related issues.
So one of the things that I think we both recognized when we started Sea Change way back in 2014 is in many areas, talking about climate change used to be kind of taboo, a topic that many people didn't want to address, in part because it had been so politicized in the past. Are you finding municipalities more likely to link these issues to climate change as an asset in communicating, or is it still something that has some reticence in addressing?
I think that the more we can start with a shared experience in a community, a recognition of a problem, and then to link that to climate change rather than leading with the discussion of climate change. I think leading with what everybody is experiencing is such a common bond, and inevitably leads people to ask the next question of why is that happening, why is that happening, why is that happening? So I feel as if leading with the problem and then understanding why that's happening can be more effective than starting with let's have a conversation about climate change, for example.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, because in our new health primer, that's exactly how we lead in with that. We talk about all these changes of, again, how nature is no longer playing within the same rules. And we do that by giving specific examples. So it's really interesting that you're seeing it in your area working that well.
So Kathleen, I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. As you travel around the country and you talk about hope and what people can do to address climate change, I have a question about the ways in which people can help, because often the conversation goes to renewable energy, purchasing an electric vehicle. There's less discussion about the power of green infrastructure, for example, preserving land and planting trees. And I'm wondering if you see any evidence that is changing, that we can make people more aware of those solutions and how they can play for people.
Yeah, so we have that in both of our primers because we obviously believe very strongly in the power of nature, and that if we work with nature instead of counter the way she normally works, that we can make great strides. And I think the numbers are pretty startling. Something like almost 30% of the excess carbon could be absorbed if we changed our land practices and did things like reforestation and afforestation. I would say that planting trees is politically popular on both sides of the aisle. There's been a lot of movement in Congress to support that. There have been movements around the world to support that. And it's very seductive. It has to be done well and right. Like anything, if it's done in a slapdash way, then perhaps the benefits aren't what we would hope for. But there are so many things that we can do, including things like protecting our kelp forests in our oceans. There are lots of amelioration projects going on as well that could help use nature to absorb some of this carbon, whether it's weatherization of rock. So there's exciting innovation happening also in the realm of nature. There's exciting innovation in learning how to farm better or raise animals better. So there's a lot of momentum that I do see. I don't hear it spoken about that much on the road. I think you're right. I think most people think of solar panels and windmills and what they either love or hate about them, and a little less about the natural solutions. But it is, I think, an important entry point because it's something that almost everyone can agree on. We all have a ethic, I believe, of stewardship. We all want to leave the world better than we received it. And that really crosses across party lines, and it's a great way to get people involved into the topic.
Well, a follow-up question on that, Kathleen. I know that you go out and really seek out conservative communities to talk to about climate change, and you've been doing this now for quite a few years. Are you seeing the reception in those communities change over time? And I guess it's a two-part question. What would your message be for people who are here watching us today in those conservative communities?
You know, it's interesting. I just got back last night from presenting down in the mountains of North Carolina, in an area where a lot of people from conservative communities come in summer to get out of the summer heat. And I was stunned, really, by how curious people are now. They are seeing the changes in the natural world. They're seeing the forest fires. They're seeing storms. They're experiencing the rain. That area had extreme flooding from Hurricane Fred, and they're curious. And I think people are opening up to the idea that there is something changing, that today is different than yesteryear. So I felt there was more of an openness to come and listen. I felt that the audiences were quite receptive to our message. It was really so reaffirming to hear them come up and say, you know, I understand the science now, I understand why it's happening, and I want to learn more, and I want to take action. And whether that action is planting trees or writing their congressman and asking them to come up with policies that fit whatever side of the aisle they may be on, but to get to the table with solutions was very different than what I experienced when we first started back in 2014, for sure. And I think we're seeing that on the national basis as well. We have the new Conservative Climate Caucus in Congress, which is quite a large caucus. I think it's the third largest caucus. So I think there's a real yearning to find a way back to the table, to have a voice. And I think that that is really important because I think we need to come together to really solve this.
Great. Well, maybe that is a great transition to having some Q&A with our audience. And we hope that this has been a helpful session, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Yes, thank you.